It's not about collecting as much data as you can.
That's interesting and also controversial.
Anytime you collect more data or more information, it comes with an overhead. I think a big question is this data useful? There's a real risk that you're throwing more hay into the haystack, but not more needles. So the process for building those models, for understanding that data, typically used to take well over a year. I think what AI has really unlocked is the ability to actually build, update and deploy those models in days. The game is not over. I think there's a lot of opportunity, and the organizations that will win will be the ones who have that focus, but are also really dynamic to be able to pivot if things change.
This is Connected with Experian, the podcast where data, tech and human insight come together to power smarter decisions. I'm Waseem Mirza, and in this series, we're speaking to the people building what's next across financial services and beyond, exploring how connected data is driving trust, innovation and real-world impact. Well, today I'm joined by Dan Kellett, Director of Lending and Analytics at Carmoola, to talk about how AI is reshaping lending and what a truly digital-first credit experience looks like. Dan, thank you so much for being here.
Not a problem. Great to be here.
For anyone who hasn't heard about your business, just briefly explain what you do.
Absolutely. So Carmoola has been around for about 4 years now. It really comes from this seed of car finance should be easier. It should be easier for consumers. How do we make it simple for customers to apply for car financing and buy that dream car?
And there's been a lot of changes in this area, haven't there, over the last couple of years, especially since the pandemic. And what was your experience of that period, and how quickly did you see the pace of change develop?
I think firstly, the pandemic has changed our ways of working. So some of the expectations around how an organization sets itself up and operates have changed. But then also, I think the dramatic increase in technology and what that's unlocked has really kind of changed the way for how lenders and organizations think about delivering those products.
All right. So given your particular role, how does lending look like on a day-to-day basis? Just talk me through that, if you would.
So let's say a consumer sees some of our adverts, they would download Carmoola's app or apply through our website. And that's the point in which me and my team's models would get involved. So at that point, we will go out and pull a huge amount of data and information about that customer, both the information that they provide us as part of the application form, but also we'll go to credit reference agencies, we'll go to other data providers, all to really give us a good understanding about that customer and their background. So they're the kind of three areas that we look to make key decisions on the individual. And then the other thing that we have to think about is the actual vehicle itself. Is this a vehicle that has been imported or perhaps has been in an accident before? What kind of mileage? All that kind of information feeds into our overall decision as to do we lend to that customer.
So those are quite good examples. Can you think of any more that illustrate the changes that you've seen happen in this space? Because many of those ideas that you mentioned, many companies were doing that before the change to AI and data in this way. What do you do differently?
That kind of core concept of making a credit decision has been around for decades. I think what AI has really unlocked is a couple of different areas. So firstly, the things that happen in the back. So the process for building those models, for understanding that data, typically used to take well over a year. Now, we're not talking years, we're not talking months. In some cases, we're not talking weeks. This is the ability to actually build, update and deploy those models in days. And what that means is that you're much more able to react to changes in the environment. It's much easier to integrate new data sources or actually to use more complex algorithms to make those decisions.
That's a very big change, isn't it? A very big jump from something that would have taken months to simply a matter of days. How far has that made the challenge much more difficult for established players, and what can they do to mitigate that? And what have you found in your experience of how to cope with that huge amount of data, or what I like to call the data explosion?
You're absolutely right. It's all about the data, because actually you could have the slickest processes and the best algorithms in the world, but actually if your data is not well understood or in multiple different places, or maybe you don't trust it, then you're going to end up with rubbish coming out of the machine and the process. So I think what it means is the organizations that are going to be able to thrive and progress quickly using AI are the ones who've thought about those foundations, who spend time really understanding the importance of data, where it is, who can use it. And so as a startup, we have a natural advantage there because a lot of our infrastructure is built from scratch. Whereas a lot of large, well-established lenders may have lots of different data infrastructure and different tools. And so a big challenge for them is, how do you integrate those things?
What do you think organizations can do in this area just to have a better sense of the direction of travel? Because for a lot of people, as you've mentioned, it's a big jump. What can they do to mitigate the risks ahead?
I think there's my top tip, to be honest, is focus on the customer outcome. I think a lot of organizations are in the process at the moment where they're doing maybe proofs of concepts or trialing different uses of AI. The ones that have the best chance of succeeding are the ones that have a real impact on consumers. I think my top tip would be find those killer use cases that really help consumers, and then things should then roll from there onwards.
Okay, so break it down for me as a customer. What can I actually do with your system that I couldn't do before through traditional routes?
So one of the great things about Carmoola is we have an amazing customer service team. They know our product inside out. They really care for the customer, and they have a huge amount of information. However, they can't be there all the time. And one of the ways in which we've looked to use AI is to supplement that customer service team with more of an agentic approach. So that allows us to answer some of the more standard questions in a really rapid way. So potentially through WhatsApp, for example, you might start a conversation with us. You might have some questions around exactly how the car's financed or what button do I need to press to do the next thing. And we'll be able to respond almost immediately with an accurate answer. And what we've seen from our customers is they love this functionality. It helps them take something which can be a bit daunting as a process and helps them through it step by step in a way that they can understand. Another example that is a bit more kind of behind the scenes is around the way that we start to think about what happens when something goes wrong. And what we want to make sure we're doing is that we're able to respond as quickly as possible to those complaints. And so being able to automate a lot of that process so that we can take a whole load of information from the customer about the car, process that in a way which is rapid and able to give them a response and an answer very quickly.
And it goes back to the idea of trust and again, fairness elements as well in there. How do you navigate that? Is that a minefield?
Again, it comes back to what's the purpose that you're trying to achieve through this conversation. There are some conversations with customers actually that are very important, happen on a human basis. So customers might be in a vulnerable situation, or there might be something kind of really bad that's happening in their lives. I think you still want to have some kind of human element to that level of conversation. However, there are some conversations where people just want an answer. They need to know the next step or the next thing to do, or some help with something. And actually what we found is that's the area where these agents are really helpful. I think we want to make sure we're not doing it in a sly way. You want to be very clear that you are using AI to have those conversations. But actually what we found is the majority of people really like the outcome. And so that's all part of the process.
So I want to touch briefly on how you ended up in this sort of intersection between credit and lending. How did it happen for you?
I started my career as a graduate statistician. So actually building a lot of the models that I talked about earlier. A lot of the constraints that were previously there because you didn't have the right storage or processing power were no longer constraints. And actually that really opened up the field for me around data and around analytics. My worry sometimes is people who are very focused on the data side lose track of the actual outcome. So for me, this is a great opportunity to bring the kind of geeky, techie data side alongside something that has a real world outcome. You know, we are finding great ways to allow people to buy their first car, for example. So that's very tangible.
Can you point to an actual real life example, totally anonymized, if you will, about a moment where you thought, well, that's why I get up in the morning. That's why I do what I do in this space.
There's a very clear feedback loop from our customers. And so our customers are not just data and numbers. And so the fact that we see real-time feedback, whether that's coming through kind of Trustpilot reviews or the feedback that they might be giving us real time, I think that makes it tangible. There was an example of a customer whose car had broken down and they were a wedding photographer. Through Carmoola, they were able to apply for a car loan, have that decisioned within a couple of hours, go to a dealer and buy a used car, which meant that they were back on the road and back on track when it came to their job. That's a real life example of how the models and the data that we have changes someone's life.
A big change to that customer's life and potentially for others. I've seen a lot of your reviews and they look pretty impressive. Would you characterize your company as a challenger in this space? Similar terms to what many described the new fintech banks.
We were formed effectively as a way to try and shake up the industry a little bit. The digital data technology driven approach, but with the customer right at the focus of what we're doing, I think kind of opens up a new way of interacting with what could be quite a boring interaction in terms of your kind of auto finance.
So in terms of the changes that you've seen in lending, you've already mentioned those, but there's lots of talk about AI going from experimental to one of the words that you used, foundational. How critical is that right now as companies and decision makers in this area facing the future, looking at those options? What should they be bearing in mind right now?
Firstly, I think it is going to be critical to the way that we operate in the future. And if you go back 6 months or a year ago, people were only just starting to talk about kind of an agentic AI or that kind of back and forth interaction. Whereas now you're starting to see more and more examples in the wild of these things being in place. So I think it's fair to say that whatever we think it's going to look like today, it probably won't be what it looks like in a year's time. What I think that doesn't mean is that you kind of put your fingers in your ears and ignore it. I think leaders need to be thinking about how am I setting up my data in a way that I can make the most of these new technologies? How am I thinking about my processes in different ways? And I think that's not just about automating as much as possible. I think it is very much about, if I was starting from scratch, how would I do these things? So I think there's a lot to think about. And then I think from an executive level, education is really important. So making sure that you're keeping up to date with what these new technologies are. I think it's now easier than it's ever been to access them yourself. So I spend a large amount of my time either writing code or interacting with agents that help me write code and build things. And actually that was a big part of my reason for joining Carmoola.
In terms of what's happening in organizations, can you paint us a picture of how you think and how you feel organizations are currently treating this, and where you think they could improve?
And I think the answer is there's probably a real spectrum. I think there's a lot of perhaps more legacy-based organizations who are still trying to get their head around what this actually means.
Is that because they're operating in silos from the past, that perhaps they're playing a sort of a catch-up game?
Yes. I think the organizations that have over the years invested in their infrastructure and processes are probably in a much better position to be able to make the most of this.
But they can catch up, can't they? The game isn't lost yet.
Absolutely. And I think it comes back to those killer use cases. It's making sure that you have a clear vision as to what you want to try and achieve, pick some use cases, and pull together a really good cross-functional team who can focus on that goal and deliver it. So you're right, the game is not over. I think there's a lot of opportunity, and the organizations that will win will be the ones who have that focus, but are also really dynamic to be able to pivot if things change.
Where do you think that data comes into this mix and the changes that you see? I mean, as you've mentioned, the data explosion, big data, and now we're already talking about agentic AI. Things have moved up a gear and things aren't staying still.
An analogy I sometimes try to use actually is it's not about collecting as much data as you can. Sometimes that's about...
That's interesting and also controversial in some quarters.
I think a big question is this data useful?
Right.
So there's a real risk that you're throwing more hay into the haystack, but not more needles.
Right. So it's about smart data, not necessarily capturing everything under the sun.
I think it's a balance. Because sometimes you might not know why you need that data yet, but I think that's where some of our data governance and GDPR in particular actually help in a way, because it forces you to answer that question of why are you collecting this data?
So now we're in this space, or perhaps we're beginning to get into the space of regulators around Europe particularly, sharpening their elbows on the topic of data and AI. Where do you see the space going, and what are the risks and rewards up for grabs?
One of the biggest risks in my mind is that we continue to see data breaches, and I think that will kill a general customer's view on an organization, but also how they think about their own personal data if they don't believe that that's being securely looked after and used in an appropriate way.
So how can we mitigate that?
I think being very clear on the use is important. I actually think the more as an organization you try to align what you're trying to achieve as a business with what your customers are trying to achieve, then the easier it will be actually to ensure that you've got the right and appropriate governance in place. I think the cases where you start to see a divergence is where you might see organizations start to get into trouble.
Okay, so let's touch on the issue of fairness in your area. What are the key challenges for you at Carmoola going forward?
Yeah, so we want to make sure that the decisions that we're making, both by machine and by human, are fair and unbiased where possible.
And how do you do that?
So I think firstly, it's really important to understand the data. Again, I come back to the understanding of the data side, but understanding any bias or instability in the data is important, because that will flow through into your overall decisions. But then also, I think this is where the kind of human in the loop is really important as well. So the ability to sense check those models, those data, to make sure that the decisions that you're making are fair and appropriate is really important.
Absolutely. Sense checking being key right now. How difficult is that, given that the models that we all know about do have a tendency to hallucinate? How do you challenge that area?
So I think this is about good risk management. So firstly, it's about understanding what are the potential risks here, and then how do you put in place frameworks that help you test for those things. So for example, if you have a kind of agentic conversation, it's really important that you've got the right overseers in place to check those conversations to make sure that they're not going off script, or if they are, you're able to course correct and make things much more aligned with the way that you want them to work.
Far from making life simple and easy for us when we're adopting AI in this context, how much of an added burden can that put on businesses if not treated properly?
So I think it's really important that businesses invest in that area, because actually if you get those things wrong, that's when you open yourself up to much more reputational risk and also kind of just general risk as well. So I think having the appropriate focus on those guardrails and those controls is essential.
So in terms of the big picture, where do you see Carmoola going from here on in? What are the main highlights on your roadmap, as it were, that you can talk about now?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had a kind of an incredible couple of years in terms of growth. We continue to see more and more customers come to us to finance their car. I think in terms of where do we take it next, there's lots of different areas. One is we talked a little bit about the agentic side and how do we increase the use of automation and AI to help really make it kind of crazy easy for customers to actually buy that car and get on the road. So that's around how do you take some of those processes that might be a bit painful or slow and just make them completely frictionless. So that's one area that my team continues to focus on. I think the other bit is how do we make sure we're continuing to listen to customers and give them more features or more opportunities to kind of enhance that experience. So for example, we recently launched a car search functionality. So if you've got your car finance, the next thing is, well, I need to find a car. And so kind of giving customers the opportunity within our app to search for various cars and put different filters on based on how far away it is, makes it much easier then to find the wheels that they want to drive.
All right, so let's have a little bit of a look at the future. And in terms of cars and what you're seeing at Carmoola, how are we going to be buying our cars in the future? Could AI and VR even help us?
Absolutely. And if you think about how things have changed already in the last 20, 30 years, it's very rare now that you will go to the local library and get the Auto Trader out and look at cars in a magazine. Obviously, the internet massively changed that in terms of the amount of information, the amount of photographs that you have available. It's not a massive step to think, okay, well, the next step is much more video based. It's much more kind of experiential for potential customers to look at what does this car look like? How would it feel to be sat in this car, to drive it?
A whole generation has grown up around video games and consoles. And of course, there are big franchises built around driving and motorsport, and many of them feature real cars. And of course, that's another avenue that some technology companies are looking at in the way we buy cars in the future. But can you see a time in the future, with your future hat on, instead of going to the traditional bricks and mortar showroom, we're popping on a headset and we're having a full experience that we would get in a showroom, but from the comfort of our own home?
I mean, you can definitely see that. That's definitely one way this could go is you're sat at home thinking, hey, I wonder what that particular car feels like. And rather than having to drive 40, 50 miles to do that, you could just pop on the headset and experience it. I think there will still be a place for that actual kind of physical experience of feeling how a car feels when you accelerate. But I think AI and technology will definitely speed up that process.
So I guess it's fair to say, Dan, that you're operating at the very cutting edge of AI and data as it pertains to car finance. How important is it to be working at this very early stage still with your own ecosystem developed around this area? Because it is uncharted territory, isn't it?
Yes, and you're right. It's essential that as a fintech or a startup that you're choosing which areas you want to insource and do yourself, but then which areas do you want to rely on the expertise of others. So from our perspective, we try and use the very best when it comes to data storage and processing. The data itself is vastly integral to our decision, and so we'll work with data providers to help us with that. But then what we try and do is keep the secret sauce internal in terms of our decisioning and the customer experience side.
So a lot more partnerships planned for the future.
I think we're always looking at how the business is going to evolve and develop. And every time you do that, you want to make sure that you're working with the best.
All right, Dan, I can't let you go today without you taking part in a quick fire round of very short questions and I hope short answers. Are you ready?
Okay, let's do it.
All right, so question 1. AI in lending. More jobs? Fewer jobs? Pretty much the same. What's your view?
Ooh, I think more varied jobs. I think the days of just specializing in one thing is gone.
Can you give me one particular example in this space, a buzzword that you would happily retire?
This might be controversial, but I would probably retire AI. I feel like it's used as a wrapper for so many different things. Let's get more specific.
That's interesting. Okay, so the most overhyped idea in AI and lending right now?
More rapid updating of models. I think the reality is things don't change that quickly.
Your most underrated or quietly powerful case?
That's got to be something around my day-to-day work, because I think that the best cases are ones that you perhaps don't see. So I would say it's the ability to check my code and tell me where I've gone wrong.
All right. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. Dan from Carmoola, thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Connected with Experian, hosted by me, Waseem Mirza. If you're interested in how data and tech are transforming decision-making, you can find more at experian.co.uk. Thanks for listening.